What's going on, everyone? It's Ben from YGO from Zero back with another Retro Yu-Gi-Oh video, and this video is a bit important as it may change the way that one of the formats that I've covered is played for the near future. Now, before I get into why exactly it may change things, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do subscribe. I'm about to head into Android format soon in these videos, and it should be a lot of fun as that format is pretty popular for a reason. So if you're looking forward to that, please do subscribe. It's the best way to keep up to date with the videos. And also, if you want to play any of the formats that I cover in these videos for yourself, we have a Discord server. Link will be in the description down below, but it's a great place to find games in all of these obscure and underexplored formats. And lastly, if you enjoyed the video, as always, please do leave a like down below. It really helps out the channel a lot. So what exactly do I mean when I say that this video may change how a format is played? Well, Imperial Format we are currently marking at the beginning of December 2002. Which is the release of the December 2002 limited list with a card pool that goes up to Pharaoh's Servant. However, between Imperial Format and LON Format, which is the next format that we're covering chronologically, even though it won't be the next format that I'm actually going to be covering in my videos, there was a slightly notable announcement that certain promotional cards that had been released would be legal for tournament play. This introduced a couple new cards into the card pool, most of which were pretty bad, but some of which do have some minor effects on the metagame as a whole. So in this video, I'm going to go through what those cards are, the potential effects they may have on the metagame, and then I'm going to throw it over to you, the viewers, to decide whether we are actually going to mark Imperial Format as happening at the beginning of December 2002, or whether we're going to have it happen in February 2003, which is when this announcement was made to legalize these cards for the Imperial Format card pool. So it will be a big decision. We'll actually be sort of holding a vote for it on the Discord server that I mentioned in the link below. So if you're interested and invested in sort of determining whether these cards will be included in the format, then head on over there and vote. But for now, let's just talk about what exactly these cards are. So firstly, I'm going to cover in a section all of their own the McDonald's promo cards, which released in December of 2002 as well, even if they weren't legal till February. Now, these cards were by and large pretty bad. They were mostly just vanilla normal monsters that didn't change the name of the game in any particular way. But there were some cards that are kind of notable to mention. First of which being Millennium Shield. Now, of course, this is a bad vanilla monster. It's a level 5 Earth monster with 0 attack and 3000 defense, and that's all it is, basically. And you may notice that this is very similar to an Earth monster that already exists, Labyrinth Wall, which has the same stats and is also a normal monster. So you might wonder why I'm pointing out Millennium Shield here. Well, you know, if you are playing a deck that's focused heavily around Labyrinth Wall, maybe searching it out with Giant Rat and then playing Shield and Sword to give yourself a big attack monster, then you might want extra copies because you could draw into a Labyrinth Wall, and if you get 3 Giant Rats and you want to get 3 searches out, you might want to have additional copies in your deck. And that's where Millennium Shield can come in. It's basically an additional copy of Labyrinth Wall. Do I think that this deck is good or meta-defining? Not at all. I think this is a very, very jank deck that is very unlikely to win a game in this format. But it is a potential strategy you can do. So, you know, now this card would be available to you if you want it. Moving on to a card that's a little bit better than Millennium Shield, we've got Goddess of Whim. Now, Goddess of Whim is a very interesting monster. It's an effect monster that says once per turn, you can toss a coin and call heads or tails. If you call it right, double this card's attack during this turn. If you call it wrong, halve its attack during this turn. Now, part of what makes this so interesting is that when it was first printed in the McDonald's pack, it didn't actually have the once per turn clause there. So many players thought, oh, I can just activate this sort of infinitely, buff up my attack to whatever value I want, and just attack in for big damage to win the game. This is a very silly way for the card to work if it did work this way, and it was quickly ruled that it doesn't work this way. So we are going to abide by that ruling because I think it's kind of silly to have a format where there's just one monster that you can summon it out, buff its attack to infinity basically, and attack in to win the game out of nowhere. So we are not playing with Goddess of Whim being able to use its effect multiple times per turn. However, even if it can only use its effect once per turn, it's still a potential option you could play. It's a search target off of Shining Angel, which could enable, you know, sort of light-based decks to be a bit better. Also, 1900 does beat Mechanical Chaser at 1850, even if it is 50-50. So, you could potentially play this as sort of like a high rolly way to out Mechanical Chasers. Also, the doubling effect does apply to attack boosts as well. So you could just try and buff this card up with a bunch of equip spells, then double its attack and go for an OTK push. So there are a lot of different interesting applications of this card. I don't think it's a very good card because it is so luck dependent, but it's a fun card that people could experiment with. And lastly, we've got the only spell in this set, which is Dark Piercing Light. Now, this is a spell that just says flip all face down monsters on your opponent's side of the field face up, which is basically just Swords Revealing Light, but without the stalling effect, which I think makes this card a lot less good. Now, of course, it does have one advantage to Swords Revealing Light, and that's if your opponent activates something like Mystical Space Typhoon or Dust Tornado, that will actually stop the Swords Revealing Light from flipping up your opponent's monsters, whereas this will not be stopped by that. So that's a potential reason to play this card, but that only really matters in very niche scenarios. And I think the stall effect on swords is the main reason why people play it. So I don't really think that this is a very good card in this format. It's something you can play and try out if you want to, though. And there's a bunch more McDonald's cards, but they're all pretty bad, so I'm not going to cover them here. Instead, I'm going to dive straight into the video game promos, which are a bit more interesting in my opinion. Now, since there are much fewer video game promo cards, and they cover some iconic cards from the game's history, I decided just to cover them all, because unlike the McDonald's pack, there's no stuffed animals or something like that, which is just a random pack filler card. They're all interesting in their own right. First up, we've got Seiyaru, which is probably the least interesting card on this list, actually. It's just a 2500 2-tribute beat stick that's outclassed by Blue Eyes. It will get an archetype later on in the game's history for some reason, so that's kind of fun. But right now, it's just a pretty bad card that probably shouldn't see any play. The next card in this list is a bit more interesting, however, and that's Salamandra. Now, this is an equip spell that equips only to a fire monster and boosts its attack by 700. So in terms of the attack boost, this outclasses things like Sword Dark Destruction and Invigoration. But, I mean, this is just outclassed by Axe of Despair, Horn of the Unicorn, so many other more modern equip spells just blow this card out of the water and can be equipped to anything, not just fire monsters. Given that the best fire monster to equip this to is honestly Fire Kraken, it's not a very ringing endorsement for actually being able to play this card. So I don't think this card will see any play, but it's kind of funny, and it is a bit of an iconic anime card. However, the last card from Dark Duel Stories actually is a bit relevant, and that's Acid Trap Hole. This is probably the most relevant card that's being legalized in this batch, because this actually does have some decent applications in Empty Jar. Acid Trap Hole is a trap that reads target one face down defense position monster on the field, flip it face up, then destroy it if its defense is 2000 or less, return it face down if its defense is more than 2000. And you might wonder how this has an application in Empty Jar when it seems kind of counter to the deck's strategy. Well, the reason for this is if your opponent activates something like an Omen of Crossout or a Ceasefire, you can chain Acid Trap Hole to flip up whatever flip monsters you want to use the effect of, cause them to be destroyed, and then they'll get their effect in a new chain without, Nobleman banishing cards from your deck or Ceasefire being able to inflict battle damage to you and preventing the flip effect from going through. So this can be used as a counter to Empty Jar's counters. It is kind of iffy though, it's not the most consistent thing in the world, but when you can actually pull it off, it is very nice. So I do think that this is probably the most relevant card here, but it's affecting a deck that I consider tier 2, and it's affecting it in a very niche way. So I'm not sure how much effect it will have on the metagame as a whole. If we do decide to include these cards in Imperial format though, then this will potentially come up in Empty Jar decks, so it's a good thing to keep in mind. Moving on to our next card here, we've got Metalmorph, and Metalmorph is a very interesting trap as it's also basically an equip card. So basically Metalmorph equips to a monster you control and increases that monster's attack and defense by 300. If it attacks, it gains attack equal to half the attack of the equipped target during damage calculation only. So while this plays badly with things like Jinzo, the effect is kind of nice at getting over pretty much anything else, and can be used similarly to something like Rush Recklessly to get over your opponent's monsters. However, because it doesn't dodge Jinzo, I don't think it's quite as good as Rush Recklessly, and unlike other equip spells, it can't really go for big damage pushes. But it is a very interesting card to consider here, and I'm sure it will probably see some experimentation if we introduce it into the format. The next card, however, probably will not see any experimentation, and that's because it is absolutely terrible, and that is Red Eyes Black Metal Dragon. This card reads, cannot be normal summoned or set, must first be special summoned from your deck by tributing Red Eyes B Dragon equipped with Metal Morph. Now, in order to actually bring this out, you need to have Red Eyes Black Dragon on field, which is already a bit of a task to do, as this is a 2 tribute monster for 2,400 attack, so it's not very good. And on top of that, you have to send it equipped with Metamorph, which is arguably a better attack stat than Red Eyes Black Metal Dragon, because Red Eyes Black Dragon will be gaining attack when it attacks with Metamorph. And you're trading it in for a vanilla monster. Now, to be fair, the attack boost by Metamorph can be destroyed by something like Dust Tornado or Mystical Space Typhoon, so there is that, I guess. But, like, it just seems like a lot of effort, and if you draw this card, you're just kind of out of luck, as you can't bring it out. You could play something like Yadokaru to send it back to deck, but ultimately, it seems like too much effort to bring out a monster that doesn't really do much. So I think this card is pretty bad. I don't think it will see any play. Lastly, for this video game, we've got Harpy's Pet Dragon. Now, Harpy's Pet Dragon is another 2 tribute dragon monster that gains 300 attack and defense for each Harpy lady on the field. Now, if you're the only Harpy player in the match, which, let's face it, if you're playing Harpies, you're likely to be the only Harpy player in the match, this card can't even top something like Blue Eyes White Dragon, as there are only 3 Harpy ladies you can play. If your opponent is playing it as well, then you can boost up the Harpy Pet Dragon attack above a Blue Eyes, but at that point it doesn't really matter because you're both playing Harpy. Harpy is already not the best deck. I think it's really fallen off from Critter Format, and it wasn't even the best deck in Critter Format too. So I don't really see this card seeing any play. It is a very interesting card, though, and it's very iconic in the anime. Next up, we've got the other card in this batch of video game promos that I think is more relevant than the others, and that is Exchange. Now, Exchange is a very interesting card. It says both players reveal their hands and add 1 card from each other's hand to their hand. So you can use this in, like, a more good stuff list to potentially, like, take the best card from your opponent's hand, but they also get to take the best card from your hand. To be fair, you're the one playing this, so you could just use up all your good cards before actually activating it. But it seems like a lot of effort for just a potential upside, so I'm not really sure it's worth playing in most strategies. However, it does have a very good niche as a counter to Exodia, as if the Exodia player has Exodia pieces in hand and you exchange and take one, then it's very hard for them to actually assemble all 5 pieces in hand, as most Exodia decks don't really play many hand rips. So you can just hold on to that Exodia piece in hand and basically never have to worry about it getting sent to grave and being backup soldiered back. So I do think that this is potentially a good side deck card if you are worried about Exodia. Exodia is a tier 2 deck, so it is out there, so this is something to potentially consider as a tech against it. But that probably is where its niche lies. Moving on, we've got some cards that are a lot less good, even though they may seem kind of fun, and that's Graceful Dice and Skull Dice. These are, again, iconic anime cards, but they're very much not good. They both have a very similar effect. Graceful Dice rolls a 6-sided die, and all monsters you control gain attack and defense equal to that result times 100 until the end of the turn. Skull Dice basically does the opposite. You roll a die, and all monsters your opponent controls lose attack and defense equal to the result times 100 until the end of the turn. But either way, neither of these is actually going to give you the attack gain that something like a Rush Recklessly would. So I do think that they're kind of outclassed by Rush Recklessly. Also, I'm pretty sure, for some unknown reason, these cards could not be activated in the damage step initially. This ruling would eventually change, but I guess the die rolling aspect of it made it so that judges were like, oh no, that's not attack and defense modifications, so you can't use it. But that's just kind of silly. It should work in the damage step, but I think in this format it actually won't. So something else to keep in mind with these. Probably won't come up since a lot of people are like dropping things like Waboku. But, I mean, it's just another reason not to play these. So I don't really think these are that good or that they'll affect the metagame at all. And lastly, we get probably the least significant cards on this list, but arguably the most iconic, and that's Alpha the Magnet Warrior, Beta the Magnet Warrior, and Gamma the Magnet Warrior. These are iconic anime monsters, but right now they're just sort of vanilla beat sticks that don't really do much on their own. I guess you could play this in like an Earth Beat deck, Beta is another 1700 attacker and has better defense than things like Axe Raider and Battle Ox, but like, I don't know, these cards are just pretty bad, and I don't expect them to see any play, at least until something like Valkyrion comes out. But that's going to do it for all the video game promos and McDonald's pack cards that are relevant and legal now. So going forward, there's sort of two different paths we can take. We can leave Imperial Format as it is, excluding these cards, just keeping it in December. These cards will be legal by the time the next format rolls around, which is either LON or Android, depending on which you jump to next. But we could also decide to switch the date for Imperial to February and actually include these cards in the card pool. I don't think they'll make many differences. They'll probably change things very slightly in the side decks of most decks, but it's an option. So let me know what you all think down in the comments below. Do you want to see these cards in Imperial format, or would you prefer they're just kept out in their own sort of thing, just added to the card pool in the next format? Again, I will be holding a vote for this on Discord, so if you have opinions on this, then head on over to there. That's where your vote will count here. And this will actually be important because I am planning on having the next monthly tournament that we're going to do be in Imperial format. So we need to know whether these cards will be legal or not. I look forward to hearing all your opinions on this topic. And until next time, I've been Ben from YGO from Zero, and I'm signing off.